President Obama now says it was a mistake for Congress to override his veto yesterday of a bill allowing 9/11 victims to sue the Saudi government. And he claims it could set a, quote, dangerous precedent for national security. We tell that to those who were personally affected by the attack, who argue the Saudis should pay for their involvement. Joe Connor lost his cousin in the September 11th attacks. He joins me now. You and I have met before, but my condolences to the family still.
Thank you.
Why do the families want this bill?
Because I think we want justice. I think the families are entitled to justice. We can't have people in Saudi Arabia being immune from what they were part of for some political reason. And we need to get to the bottom of it, what happened and why.
Are there lawyers out there ready to go to begin the process of discovery whereby they gather information which would enable them to point fingers at specific human beings in the Saudi government as having organized, orchestrated, or financed the attacks?
I think there probably are. Yeah, I'm not associated with any of them myself, but I think there probably are.
What do you say to the argument that this will expose American personnel, civilian and military, and American assets in foreign countries to the same type of litigation there, which would never be fair by their standards to Americans?
I think it's garbage. We can't fight.
I agree with you, but I want to hear why.
Yeah, well, we can't fight our war on terrorists being afraid of what other people might do to us. We've also sued in the past Libya and Iran, and we haven't had the reciprocity type suits. And people would say, well, they're on the terrorism list and Saudi's not. Well, let me tell you, Saudi either ought to be on the list, but the list is pretty much a political joke. Oh. They removed Cuba from the list, and they sponsor terrorists, including the terrorist that killed my father.
Right. Right. Why do you think that there is this mystery in the administration of President George W. Bush, 8 years, President Barack Obama now nearly 8 years, of our true relationship to Saudi Arabia? We sold them over $100 billion with a B dollars worth of military equipment last year, and yet they export some of the most dangerous, radical Islamic ideas through violence of any other country in the world.
Hobby movement. Yeah, we are in bed with them in a very odd way. I think that this litigation, or this allowing the litigation, will get us to the bottom of what is going on here. Why are we in bed with them, and what have they been doing? The royal family is a very big family. There may be people who are more on our side and others who aren't, but they need to all be exposed.
Do any of the families disagree with you and agree with President Obama?
I think to say any, but my family, we can't agree on dinner. So I would just say that there are plenty of people in 9/11 families who disagree, but I think the majority are just looking for justice. They want to know what happened. And I was at Guantanamo Bay, and I saw Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other terrorists, and the people who put them up to it and funded them through these charities, they deserve to be tried or brought to justice just the same way that their agents were.
My condolences again to your family, and thanks very much for joining us. So what about those who claim Congress went too far this time and is actually putting our country at risk? Here now, former ambassador to the UN, Fox contributor, and my good friend John Bolton. Mr. Ambassador, you just heard a very compelling argument from a very sympathetic arguer who lost his cousin. What would you say to him if he could listen to you now?
Well, everybody feels sympathy for the families of the victims of the 9/11 terrorist attack. My father was a firefighter for the city of Baltimore. If he had been alive and with FDNY on September the 11th, I have no doubt what he would have done, and he may have suffered the same fate. So I'm not unsympathetic. However, this bill is a cruel hoax on the families. It will do nothing to uncover what, if anything, the Saudi Arabian government did.
All right, now, Ambassador, you know, because you're a lawyer as well as a diplomat, how aggressive plaintiffs' lawyers can be, and you know the tools that are available to them. Let me ask you this. Are they going to get to first base in trying to figure out who, if anybody, in the Saudi government organized, orchestrated, or financed the attacks?
They are going to get nothing. Now, let me say, I think the biggest danger of this bill is the harm it will do to America. And your previous guest said that the threat of retaliation against the United States was garbage. That is badly wrong. But let me just come back to the litigation. This provides for civil lawsuits. You know what happens. The case is filed. The plaintiff's attorneys will seek the production of documents. They'll notice depositions. They'll ask written interrogatories. And the Saudis will say, stick it in your ear. Now, a court may impose sanctions on Saudi Arabia. They may attach assets. The Saudis are going to take care of that, one, by removing assets from the United States, and two, attaching American assets in Saudi Arabia.
All right, John.
Let me just make one more point. There will never be a deposition of an official of the Saudi Arabian government.
Let me ask you about the theory. We're going back to the first year of law school. Benjamin Cardozo, the most quotable judge in American history. Where there's a wrong, there's a remedy. What remedy is there for these families that have suffered as they did?
Okay, it's December the 8th, 1941, and the families of the victims of Pearl Harbor say, by God, let's sue Japan.
John, a different world, a different attitude, not nearly as litigious as we are today.
No. Listen, if the Saudis did as the families of the victims believed and were complicit in the 9/11 attack, they committed an act of war against the United States. And just as George W. Bush responded to an act of war by overthrowing the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, that's the remedy for Saudi Arabia, not a lawsuit.
Okay,
to say it with a straight face, they have to believe, the victims' families, that George W. Bush covered up for the Saudis. I just want one of them to stand up and say it.
Briefly, John, because you were in the George W. Bush administration, you were one of his chief advisors and diplomats right here in New York at the UN. Why the mystery in the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, which has now been going on for a couple of generations?
Well, I think the mystery, frankly, was a mistake on both sides. You know, this stemmed from various documents that were deemed classified in a congressional report and the subsequent 9/11 report. I think we can see that was a clear mistake. All of this information should have been made public, and if it had been, I don't think we'd be here today, honestly.
Joe, we have half a minute. You got the last word.
Okay, thank you.
He means well. This is not personal.
Yeah, look, I don't think we can win the war on terrorists by litigation, and I certainly understand that. But you know, we want the truth. We want to get down to the basics here of what happened, and if our government is not willing to call Saudi on what they are, then the people have to take the only remedy that they can have, and the only remedy left to we the people is through the lawsuit here, and that's what we got left.
Joe Connor, former Ambassador John Bolton, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, should voters be allowed to take selfies of